Hello everyone, today is March the 22nd, 2016, and once again this is Pirate Video. I'm trying to make up for lost time, so I make it a little couple of videos today. A lot of people hear about the rhetoric on Iran with their nuclear program without even realizing what's the situation behind it. However, Iran right now is trying to go forwards with a nuclear program for nuclear power. Again, to power the stations, power their factories, power their homes, etc. Such as what we have here today and many countries around the world. Now, Israel and Israeli leaders such as Netanyahu, who is the current Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu, constantly states that Iran is threatening Israel, threatening the world peace, threatening the world for that matter, on their nuclear program. And once again, their nuclear program is for nuclear power. They do not have the capability as of now to make any sort of nuclear weapons, at least for 10 or more years. Okay? And they are overwatched by the IAEA, the International Atomic Agency group. So Israel, on the other hand, as I mentioned in many cases of my videos, who are not being overwatched in any way by any international atomic agencies or the UN or America for that matter. And I'm going to get on to that. Anyone, American, the UN, the international agencies are forbidden to look into nuclear, Israel's nuclear program or arsenal, okay? And Israel do have many nuclear bombs, missiles, what have you. They constantly state that they are a non-nuclear nation. They constantly point out to everyone that Iran is this nuclear anti-peace world destruction from Iran, death to Israel and everything else, which is absurd to least for that matter. Israel has blood on their hands in numerous cases, and I'm going to point out to you the history of Israel's nuclear program and hypocrisy of what is going on, the hypocrisy of what the people are not being told about nuclear Israel, okay? Now, I'm going to be reading over on some notes I had put down before, so you might see me looking and squinting here because I do not have these in play on paper, so I have it on my computer. So bear with me if you see me a little squinting. I'm trying to get as best as I can here. In 1992, an Israeli cargo plane crashed in Amsterdam, killing 43 people. Israeli officials claimed that the plane was carrying flowers and perfume. Now, you can look this up. Don't go by what I say, look it up. I'm here just as a messenger, okay? It took a 6-year investigation and a Dutch Parliament inquiry to reveal that, in fact, the plane was carrying DMNP, the key component to sarin nerve gas. Okay? In the 1950s, Shimon Peres at the time, I believe, was the prime minister. However, he was a prime minister at one time. I do not know at the moment. But in the 1950s, Shimon Peres discussed building a nuclear plant modeled after the French nuclear plant. Okay? Information started to leak out that a real security wanted to build an atomic bomb. Okay? I'm sorry, the information started to leak out that Israel, I'm sorry about that, wanted to build an atomic bomb. Israel later denied. The report then stated that its intention was to build a nuclear program for peaceful purposes. Where did we hear that from? Okay. Now, before I go on, Israel constantly states on national news, we hear about it all the time, on American, European, who knows what channels they have, stating about Israel's concern over Iran's nuclear program. Iran stated many times this is for peaceful purposes. Again, Shimon Peres, 1950s, stated the same thing, that it was for peaceful purposes. However, it was a very different story. Moving on. Later, John F. Kennedy found out and was worried about a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. He later sent inspectors to the Israeli nuclear plant. There, the inspectors were lied to and sent to a false plant, which they confirmed was not a reliable source. Remember, this is an American team under John F. Kennedy went over to Israel to inspect the plant. Israel deliberately took him to a false plant, however. But in 1961, when the U.S. inspectors entered the nuclear plant, they were lied to. They were taken to a facility shown to be a fake control room on the ground floor. They failed to show the U.S. inspectors the 6 other levels underneath the building. Okay? They were unaware that the 6 levels underneath was where the plutonium was made. According to freelance journalist Peter Hounam, Hounam, the Americans were completely hoodwinked. Okay, according to Peter Hounam, the Americans were completely hoodwinked. All of the entrances bricked up and plastered over. Okay? So it was to disguise and hide the entrances to go down to the ground floor. Kennedy persisted on sending over U.S. inspectors to Israel to have an inspection. Okay? Again, this is 1961. In 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated. After the death of John F. Kennedy, the pressure on Israel was off. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, turned a blind eye on Israel, pretending nothing had happened. Imagine that. Then, in 1969, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir and US President Nixon struck a deal, and to every other president after him would not question Israel's nuclear program. It was called nuclear ambulatory. In 1969, Golda Meir had a meeting with Nixon and every other president after Nixon. Till this date, is forbidden to discuss anything to that matter of Israel's nuclear program. Okay? When asked by a BBC reporter to Prime Minister Shimon Peres, "Isn't this deception?" the reporter asked Peres. Peres stated, "When someone wants to kill you and you see a deception to save your life, it is not immoral." Now wait a second. Here is Prime Minister Peres, stating that if you see someone trying to kill you, it is not deception to save your life. Well, I could say that for a few leaders that were killed between 2001 and today, but they did not use any deception, such as Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and now Mr. Assad of Syria, who is fighting for his life, and other numerous people. But these nations, again, face the same dilemma of someone trying to kill them, and they used everything to defend themselves, but they did not have any nuclear weapons of mass destruction. However, here is Israel Prime Minister Shimon Peres stating that if you have a weapon and you lie about it to save your life, it is okay. It is not immoral. So therefore, he is justifying what others would do the same thing. But if Iran wants to build a weapon, for that matter, to help themselves, it is immoral. It is deception. It is criminal act. Therefore, they should be bombed to the Stone Age. Let's move on. Okay, now I got to Mr. Peres. Again, when the BBC reporter constantly asked Shimon Peres, "Isn't this deceitful? Isn't this immoral? Lying?" Shimon Peres once again states, I don't have to answer to anything. I don't have to answer anything. I don't see any reason why." This is Prime Minister Shimon Peres. When asked by the BBC reporter, was it at a double standard to look for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, Shimon Peres stated, "How can you compare Saddam Hussein and Iraq, which is not a state? It is a mafia to Israel." Talking about hypocrisy. Okay, let's move on. Shimon Peres stated, "How can you compare Saddam Hussein and Iraq?" To Israel, he called them a mafia. when Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, came in office, he caused a turmoil between Israelis and Palestinians. And this conflict, 300 Israelis were killed. Oh, well over 2,000 Palestinians were killed. Okay? In addition, there was a mysterious poison gas that had been used on the civilian Palestinian population. The Israelis stated it was tear gas. However, the Palestinian victims had burns in their eyes, skin, and nerve damage. And this is going on today, people. But I'm just reading the story for you so you understand about Israel's, a little known story of Israel's nuclear program, okay? Let me go on. Now, again, over Ariel Sharon, when he took Prime Minister in 2003, I believe, stated he started great trouble, and well over 2,000 Palestinians were killed. Used chemical weapons on them and all types of weapons against them, and stated it was nerve gas. Today, it is still unknown of what was used on the Palestinians. And this is going according to the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, the what's that group, Amnesty International, and so on. All these groups, all these organizations had not found the cause of this gas. What's the cause of this gas coming from? What was the side effects? This was only first effects of burning eyes, skin. Later on, it got to lungs, heart, nerves, brain, you name it. Then you have birth defects, abnormalities, you name it. Yet he called it nerve gas. Let's move on. Today Israel is free from any investigations, protected from America and her allies. In 2003, we were told that Iraq under Saddam Hussein was threatening world peace with chemical and nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Remember that? Eventually, in the end, we know now the truth that there wasn't any weapons of mass destruction at all. Then in 2015, we demanded that Syria surrender its chemical weapons, in which Syria complied. Then we create ISIS to destroy Syria in a civil war. Now, of course, there are talks of a military invasion of Syria from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. We have already well over 80 nationalities fighting in the Syrian war, and I don't want to say it's a civil war. This is a coup against the Syrian government. It is not only I would say, civil war. because we had organized, along with Israel, the number one enemy here, organized these bloodthirsty terrorists from over 80 different nationalities: Turkish, Arabians, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, anyone for that matter, thrown in there to dismantle and destroy Syria, just like we did to Iraq. The only thing that's saving Syria right now, the only reason why Assad is still in power, is because Russia, as I stated before in my interviews over here on this program. If it wasn't for Russia, Assad would have been killed a long time ago. Syria would have been balkanized like Iraq is, destroyed, chopped up in pieces in different countries. One is a Kurdish country, one is a Druze country, one is a Maronite country, all sorts, just to destroy and divide and to conquer. Let me move on now. Today we see the US and Israel constantly stating that Iran, is posing a nuclear danger to the world by trying to put together a nuclear weapon. And the IAEA, the international watchdog, constantly goes into Iran to monitor the program and constantly states the same thing. There is no nuclear weapons being created in Iran, and they are incapable of doing that. And this is stated by the IAEA, and also the international IAEA and also the UN had gone in with its inspectors and stated there is no nuclear weapons development in Iran. Also, we had American inspectors in there as well. Let's move on. Now in 2016, we are constantly reminded and constantly stated that Iran is on its way to build a nuclear arsenal in the danger of the world. When Iran not only allowed UN and US inspectors to their nuclear facility, but is also a member of the IAEA, which is a nuclear watchdog, as I stated. Any nation who wishes to have a nuclear program for peaceful purposes, let alone military use, would have to be joined to join the IAEA. Again, any nation on earth who wishes to have a nuclear program would have to be a member of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They are a nuclear watchdog to go in, inspect, and work alongside to make sure you have a nuclear program that is for peaceful purposes, peaceful means, and not only that, not allow to your nuclear program to explode like Chernobyl did. So, therefore, in order for Iran to go with a nuclear program, has to be watched over by these groups and organizations, which they are. But again, Benjamin Netanyahu constantly rattles his sabers, stating that he must destroy Iran before the world trembles under Iran's threat. Now, Israel, on the other hand, has never and stated they will never have any. Again, Israel has never allowed and stated they will never have any UN or US inspections on their nuclear program. Now, I'm talking about Israel's hypocrisy of their nuclear program, of their weapons that they have, nuclear weapons, and how they came about with the nuclear arsenal years ago. They had stole these secrets and missiles and facilities, going around illegally building these nuclear arsenals in Duma, Israel, which is where their nuclear facility is. And this is not a power station for power. This is a nuclear arms. Missiles, rockets, you name it. Now, I'm going to point out something here. There was a person who blew the horn on Israel's nuclear program. It was not an American. It was not a Russian. It was an Israeli. Mordechai Levy, an Israeli nuclear engineer working in Duma way back 1950s, 60s, knew well enough and knew very well what Israel was doing, which was illegal, going and lying to the world, and went ahead to make their nuclear program into weaponry, rockets and missiles. And now today they have these missiles in several submarines that provided by Germany. These nuclear missiles are now in their submarines, maybe about 8 submarines that I know of. These submarines go anywhere around the world and could shoot, and was stated by one Israeli high-ranking military general to state, and his words were, if any European country wishes to denounce Israel in any way, to come down and forcefully force Israel to get into any court of law, that Israel will use nuclear weapons on any European capital. Okay? Well, so much for Iran. Mordechai Levy had put his life on the line by exposing Israel's nuclear arsenal. Mordechai Levy, his family threatened, himself imprisoned for many years in Israeli jails. He was kidnapped from other country, thrown into Israeli prison illegally. Okay? And he's Israeli himself. Today, Mordechai Levy, well, long ago changed his name to Mordechai Venu, an Israeli who exposed Israel's dirty nuclear secrets. Now, I just want to again tell you on who came with this situation of exposing Israel's dirty nuclear secret. Was an Israeli himself. The man put himself on the line, his life on the line, to expose the dangers of what Israel was intentions of. Okay? And for that matter, he is now living in Australia and is a Christian. I dedicate this program to Mordechai Venu. Okay? For putting his life on the line, his family, and for mankind on exposing the terrorist state of Israel's intention. Again, I dedicate his courage to put his life on the line, to tell the truth. Mr. Venue, again, is now a Christian living in Australia. I want to say for Mr. Venue, thank you for being an honest person, but more also a decent human being, for doing the right thing. God bless you, and thank you for watching.